Well, here it is. The movie made in celebration of the 100-year anniversary of Walt Disney and Roy Disney signing their first contract that would eventually lead to the creation of a movie empire. Now, some had very high hopes that this would be something of a return to form for Disney, while others weren't so optimistic. Now, personally, I was in the former camp. Call me crazy, but just looking at previews and stuff, I thought it might actually be pretty good. But that being said, similar to Strange World, once I heard many people were bashing it 10 ways from Sunday, my optimism kind of faded a bit. So while I still tried to go into it with an open mind, as I do with almost every movie I watch, I can't lie when I said I expected to end up hating it by the time it was over. So today, I would just like to give a brief overview of how I felt about this movie and how it compares to the rest of the Disney animated canon. And obviously there will be major spoilers ahead, so in case you'd like to watch the movie for yourself first, you should probably come back to this video another day. So please consider this your spoiler warning. And also, please do note that this video is only going to be about my personal opinions on it. I'm not a professional movie critic or anything like that. Just your average movie lover. So please take or leave what I have to say as you wish, because you aren't in any way required to agree with it. Alright, so to cut right to the chase, how exactly did I feel about this movie? I liked it. That was my exact thought once it was over. I liked it. It wasn't the greatest Disney movie I had ever seen, but it was also nowhere near what some of these people online were saying. I mean, I'm just going to be honest here. I really don't get some of the hate this movie has been receiving. I know some people are mad at Disney and all of that, and they have every right to. Even I'm mad at some of the things Disney's done. But at the same time, I'm not going to take it out on a random movie that doesn't deserve it. But before I go into a rant about that, let's just focus on the movie itself and look at what I believe to be its pros and cons. And for the bad stuff first, I think it tries a little too hard to be funny at times. Like Gabbo, for example, could get pretty annoying with his never-ending pessimism. And really, the whole beginning was just kind of lacking, with it being only once Asha actually met King Magnifico that things started picking up. In fact, I might go as far as to say that if it weren't for the first 15 minutes, the movie might have been much better on the whole. And for one other minor thing, I wish, no pun intended, that Star could have talked, or at least articulated what he was trying to say better. Because at times it was really hard to understand what it wanted to convey. It probably would have been better if he had been a shapeshifter and love interest for Asha like they had planned to. Now, in terms of its truly bad qualities, that's really about all I've got. And even then, not all the movie's attempts to be funny were bad ones. I even remember in the theater where I was able to watch it from, the other people in the audience, kids and adults alike, were actually laughing at quite a few of the jokes. Though I'll be honest, what got to me was the chicken dance scene. Seriously, that was pretty dang funny, especially because it comes completely out of nowhere. And not to mention, despite what the trailers would have you believe, Valentino actually had some pretty good one-liners, and there were a lot less juvenile humor in it than it implied. Let me just say, it wasn't Disney's best attempt at humor, but it also wasn't the worst either. Not even close, I'll tell you that right now. And honestly, I could say the same for the soundtrack as well. Because while it doesn't come anywhere close to Disney's best with Alan Menken and the Sherman Brothers, some of the songs are still pretty catchy. Like I said, it can't stand up against Disney's best, but it still pretty much works. In fact, reprises aside, I don't know if there's been a Disney villain since Gaston who actually gets two songs to sing. And again, I will admit they're actually pretty good. I even had "This Is the Thanks I Get" stuck in my head for quite a while afterwards. Really, I'd say the song that falls the most flat is the first one, which feels as if it's trying too hard to evoke the family madrigal from Encanto and not really succeeding, which all ties back to what I said about the beginning being the worst part. But on that topic, let's get into the meat of things, starting with the plot, which, to keep it short, is that on an island kingdom, King Magnifico takes people's wishes, making them forget what they are in the process, and decides which ones he will make come true and which ones will never come to pass. Now, I have seen people debate about whether or not King Magnifico was actually right, but the thing is, I do actually agree with the narrative and Asha here. If Magnifico isn't going to grant most of their wishes, then he should give them back so they can at least try and make them come true themselves. It would be one thing if he just took their wishes to consider granting them, and the people in question still had full knowledge of what they were, but it's the fact that they don't remember what it is and he still won't give them back that places him firmly in the wrong. Because let's face it, sometimes all a person has in life is their wishes and the determination to make them come true. So if you take that away from them too, what do they really have left? If that happened in real life, where people actually forgot what their greatest wish was and it never came true, do you know how much stagnation and depression there'd be? My point is, I think the movie does a good enough job of placing King Magnifico in the wrong and Asha in the right, especially once he goes off the deep end. And on that topic, I also think the characters, for the most part, were done pretty well. Asha works as a lead character and her motivations are pretty noble and understandable, and her family is also pretty nice to boot. Though, just as a side comment, could somebody at 100 years old really be that active? But regardless, her friends also work just fine, apart from the complaints I mentioned earlier, both human and animal. And I particularly like that while Dyla walked with a crutch, a big deal is never made of it. It's like it's just treated as a part of her body and attention is never drawn to it. Because as I made clear in my Strange World review, when Disney gets too self-congratulatory, the results are cringe-worthy. But of course, there's one specific character I'd like to go over in detail, and it's probably one that you'd expect. The movie's villain, King Magnifico. The first Disney villain in over a decade to not be a twist villain or presented as sympathetic. I know many had high hopes for him. Now, did he pass the test? Well, I'd say it depends on how you're ranking him. Because if I'm being honest, I wouldn't say he ranks among the greatest Disney villains ever. But let's face it, that's an incredibly high bar to clear. But I'd say as a villain for the movie itself, he works pretty well. I mean, his role is almost on par with Asha's in terms of importance. And while I'd say that maybe they dedicate a little too much time to his backstory and downfall, once he succumbs to the dark magic, he becomes outright terrifying. And what I particularly liked is that he doesn't redeem himself in the end, and the movie commits to him being the villain. Again, I think they might have tried a little too hard to explain why he turned evil, but that doesn't change the fact that the threat he presents is a pretty dang big one throughout the whole thing, especially at the climax. Seriously, a fully grown adult, was almost convinced that there was no way they could stop him at that point. And speaking of that, I also found it a bit interesting that it wasn't actually Asha that defeated him so much as everybody standing up to him using their inner stars that finally puts him away. I mean, considering how powerful he was by that point, that actually made sense. Though I will admit, his defeat could have been given a little more fanfare, but I was just happy to actually see him get a comeuppance instead of him apologizing for everything and that being that. And on that topic, I thought the Queen was an unneeded character. She's another one that they should have gone with the original concept for, or even outright scrapped, as it might have given Magnifico a bit more edge to him if she wasn't there to try and rein him in and help the heroes later on. But either way, my point is that for Disney trying to do an actual traditional evil bad guy again, they actually didn't do the worst job. Especially because, in actual Disney tradition, his actions dictate most of the plot, and he's a constant threat to the characters throughout, rather than the characters themselves causing problems or some benign force doing it. Really, like I said before, my biggest issue with him is that the movie over-explains his fall to villainy, but for the most part he does work. And again, both his songs are actually pretty good ones. So as I've already noted a few times earlier, not the best attempt at Disney at a villain, but nowhere near the worst either. Sorry if that sounds familiar, but that's the best way to describe it. Now, speaking of Magnifico, it's kind of obvious that Disney was so committed to making a traditional villain like Disney is known for because they wanted to make the movie feel more retro in nature and like a callback to the way Disney used to be. And once again, I don't believe it does a bad job at that. I mean, this might just be the most Disney-feeling movie the company has made in almost a decade. Because as I've spoken about in countless videos, most Disney movies these days feel like modified Pixar movies, but this one doesn't have much of that Pixar feeling, and instead has more of those classic things Disney is famous for, like a shorter running time, an actual villain who causes the whole plot to happen and stays evil the entire time, a hero who's nice, likable, and actually right, who barely makes any deliberate wrong choices, has a simple message, and above all, isn't too mature. And honestly, I think what some might criticize it for is one of my biggest praises towards it. That it actually feels like a kid's movie that doesn't delve into these mature themes that'll go right over their heads, and instead has a simple, timeless message to convey about the importance of wishes and that we all have the power to make them come true. In fact, one of the best things about this movie may just be that it doesn't try and deconstruct the Disney tropes that everybody knows and loves. Because sure, while the movie does end up saying that we don't need magic to make our dreams come true, it handles it a lot more delicately than most other recent Disney movies. Because while a lot of the villagers do realize in the end that they don't need Magnifico's magic to see their wishes come to fruition, Asha is still given magic to help them in their tasks regardless. As even if it's in a different sense than in the movie, sometimes even in the real world we all need a little magic to help our wishes along sometimes. And the movie smartly uses fictional magic as a metaphor for that instead of being too on the nose. And another great thing in this regard is that Magnifico repeatedly insists that in the real world, dreams don't come true, as a lot of 2010 Disney movies tried to show. But here he's proven completely wrong about that in the end. In other words, I believe this movie actually does a pretty good job of showing exactly what it is Disney stands for, and instead of being ashamed of it, they embrace it. Basically, as a Disney movie, I believe it does far better than a lot of their recent efforts. And on that topic, I also like how it's being an ode to Disney of the past isn't too on point or self-congratulatory either. Because while it does have its moments, it mostly commits to telling its own story, with the references mostly just sprinkled in. The Peter Pan thing was pushing it a little bit though. But while I do feel that Wish does a better job than most of its contemporaries of feeling like a Disney movie, that doesn't mean it's perfect. Because it almost feels like it's being made by people desperately trying to understand Disney and not quite getting it, which leads to some of the problems it has and unnecessary changes it made. But again, to their credit, they did still get it a lot better than I ever would have thought possible from them, as sad as that may sound. And finally, I also will admit that I liked its animation style. Because while I've made it no secret that I prefer traditional animation over CGI, I will still freely say that their use of it here is pretty impressive. It honestly feels like the pages of a storybook that has come to life, and if that was indeed the look they were going for, I do congratulate them for it. I mean, I still would have preferred to see it in 2D animation like they originally intended, but this was still pretty good. I might even go out on a limb here and say that I enjoyed the animation in this movie more than in the Spider-Verse movies, as sacrilegious as that may sound. But I already made my issues with those movies quite clear in my Across the Spider-Verse video, which you can find a link in the description to. But my point here is, unlike in some of their previous movies, where it felt like CGI just for CGI's sake, at least in this movie, it felt as though the art style at least had a purpose to it. And again, I think it actually fulfills that purpose pretty well. Okay, so to put it all simply, Wish is most definitely not perfect, but especially as a Disney movie, I do think it's pretty good. Now again, it does have its flaws, as I just spent most of the video going over, but I still think it was pretty enjoyable. To put it simply, it's something that I would happily watch again. Now, can it compare to Once Upon a Studio in terms of being a celebration of Disney? No, absolutely not. Because as I made clear in my video on the short, which you can also find a link in the description to, I think Once Upon a Studio was pretty much perfect and everything Disney should try to be these days. That short, more than anything else from Disney since the mid-2010s, truly understands what the meaning of Disney is. But even if it can't compare to Once Upon a Studio, I do believe that Wish got more right than a lot of other recent Disney movies of the 2010s and early 2020 movies have. And I can say with complete sincerity that I do believe it is a step in the right direction for Disney animation. Alright, I think that was everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. How did you feel about Disney's Wish? And how does it compare to what I had to say on it? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as I said at the beginning, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video. You are absolutely free to have your own opinion on this movie, and if it completely contradicts what I had to say on it, that's perfectly okay. And thank you all for watching. It is very appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.